All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is our 10th International Women in Biomechanics meeting. We are really excited that you guys continue to show up for Women in Biomechanics, and especially today we have invited our allies and friends of IWB to be here with us and learn about this important topic of citation diversity statements. So welcome. And if you are here because someone forwarded you the message about the meeting details or anything like this, please feel free to join IWB. And we have a website that will be posted in the chat, and you can become a member, sign up as an ally, and we'll keep you posted of all IWB events. I'm going to pass it to Caitlin to talk about our proposed name change.
Hey, everybody. So we have been discussing as an executive council and realized that when we started IWB, we always wanted to be as inclusive as possible. And we wanted to include all women and non-binary people who want to join our group and feel that they belong here. And we attempted to do this by using the X, spelling WOMXN. But we've also realized over time that using the X might be othering to some people. And so we're working towards changing to women with an E. We're still trying to be as inclusive as possible, and we wanted to put this out before we made the change final. So if anybody's interested in giving their thoughts, feel free to send us an email at our Gmail address or chat me or Anna on Slack, because we do want to have conversations about this. And we recognize that we are trying our best to get it right. And we also have, our own perspectives and want to hear other people's perspectives so we can come together on this. So if you have any comments, please try to get them in by May 5th, but we'll continue the conversation forward.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. A few other announcements. We mentioned this last month, but we are putting together a blog led by Alexa Johnson. So please feel free to message her if you have something you'd like to write about and post on our website. Please email her here. And I think we'll also post that in the chat. And then one other note, hopefully you got the email announcement about this, but we're really grateful that the National Biomechanics Day and the Biomechanics Initiative have sponsored fellowships for the American Society of Biomechanics meeting this year. So the fellowship will cover registration for one postdoc or faculty or professional member and one student member. So please use the form, fill it out. Winners will be drawn randomly, just so that we can be fair. And there's some requirements. You have to be a member of ASB and IWB, and you have to have submitted an abstract to ASB 2021. And we'd like you to write an IWB blog for the experience if you do win. But other than that, it's just filling out the form. So please do that if you're an ASB member. All right, I'll pass it to Amanda to talk about our June meeting.
Hi, for our June meeting, we would like to feature basically you. If you are a PhD student, postdoc in industry or academia, either early career or tenure, we would love to have your voice at our June meeting, where we would discuss career paths and just basically how did you decide on your career paths? If you're a PhD student, how did you decide on your university or anything like that geared to any women in biomechanics who are undergraduates. So if you would like to speak at our June meeting, please use the Google form or contact me, which is my name, ramandadilling@gmail.com. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ramanda. Perfect. A lot of Google forms, but it's good stuff. All right, and then just a quick announcement about new channels. Eva started a channel about career questions, which actually really ties in nicely with our June meeting. So please join that channel and ask your questions, and we will make sure to bring them up at our June meeting as well to our panelists. And then Katie, did you have some words about the Cite Women channel?
Yeah, sure. So this was a channel we started last month. We talked about it a little bit at last month's meeting. And we'll actually hear today kind of more on this topic. But it's a channel with a chance to kind of either read what other people have been working on, or if you are writing on a specific topic, kind of advertise that so that we can generate some conversation about who is actually published in these spaces, as an opportunity to kind of be proactive in citing each other's work, and also recognizing the publications coming out of this group. So I'll find that you can browse the available Slack channels.
Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah, and if you haven't joined our Slack channel yet or have trouble, feel free to message us and we'll get you on there. There's a lot of really good resources there. And all right, with that transition, we are really excited to have with us today the co-author for the Citation Diversity Statement article that inspired the Cite Women channel, Dr. Naomi Chesler. She's a professor of biomedical engineering at the University of California, Irvine, and director of the Edwards Life Sciences Center for Advanced Cardiovascular Technology. We're also very grateful to be joined by her graduate student who's currently at UW-Madison. That's University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her name is Madison Freeman, and she recently created a citation diversity statement for her manuscript submission. So thank you so much for being here. With that, I will stop sharing and I will let Dr. Chesler take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm even more excited to learn about this group. You know, I don't normally go to the American Society of Biomechanics meeting, but I do go to the Summer Biomechanics meeting, or the SB3C, Summer Biomechanics, Biotransport, and Bioengineering in some order conference. And so we'll have to think about how we can actually provide a similar kind of fellowship for your members as you're doing with the ASB. And actually, come to think of it, I'm the board chair of the, that's not right, executive committee. Oh, I'm the executive committee chair of the American Society of Mechanical Engineering Bioengineering Division this year. And so this might be a very good year for me to see if I can create something like that, since I'm large and in charge, which I won't be next year. I'll just be past president. So anyway, yeah, so very happy to be here. I have been working to promote the careers of women in engineering for a very long time, and so very happy to meet all of you, and happy to be a resource for you. Anahit invited me to present, and I passed the buck a little bit because when we were first learning about this citation diversity statement, as most advisors do, I asked, the graduate student working with me if she could, like create one for the paper that she was about to submit. And Madison did that very well. And so I'm going to have her talk about her experiences creating it. I was informed about the idea of a citation diversity statement by Lori Stetton, who's the past president of BMES, and she's the department chair at WashU. And she came to me because I am currently the publications committee chair for the Biomedical Engineering Society. And so it was in that role that I brought this idea to the editors of all the BMES publications and asked them to consider. I also brought this, by the way, to the editors of the Journal of Biomechanical Engineering, and it didn't get as positive a reception there. But I also was sort of like not interested in pushing it too hard, but it got a very warm reception at BMES. And all the editors were very excited about it, and especially Stefan Dumas, who is the editor-in-chief of the Annals of Biomedical Engineering, was very excited about it. And so he was like, I'll draft it. And of course, it was ultimately drafted by a graduate student working with him, the first author, Bethany Rowson. I mean, I think basically we were co-opting an idea put forth by folks in another discipline and suggesting that this would be a great thing to do for BMES journals and providing some examples. And that's what that article is about. And we will talk about that, but first, I wanted to talk about something else that I've been working on that I thought was really also relevant to this discussion. So let me, whoops, not mean to hit that button. I almost sent you into breakout rooms, so good thing that didn't happen. Okay, so there. So I thought it would also be pertinent to talk a little bit about Fund Black Scientists, which is a paper that I also recently co-authored, which I think is very synergistic with the Citation Diversity Statement. Really, it's been quite a year for activism, and especially working to become anti-racist. And I think that's very synergistic with the Citation Diversity Statement. So I want to talk about this first, and then we will pass it over. I will pass it over to Madison to talk a little bit more about the Citation Diversity Statement. And then I'm looking forward to fielding questions. So we didn't prepare a super long presentation because we're really hoping to interact. Okay, so when I give talks about my science, I often begin with defining biomechanics, which I consider to be the mechanical properties or function of tissues. And for me, that's the cardiopulmonary system, including blood. And I talk about how that's a little bit different than mechanobiology, which are the effects of biological forces on the cardiopulmonary system. And I talk a little bit about how an abnormal mechanical environment can lead to a biological response, and that biological response can lead to mechanical property changes. And those mechanical property changes can then ultimately alter the environment in this sort of vicious cycle. And I used that recently to talk about the needs we have for funding Black scientists. So, you know, this is an international group, but if we think about the US was founded on slavery and on slave labor being used to drive economic growth in this country. It was a political strategy that enabled a free and, you know, highly maltreated workforce to support the building of our universities, our institutions, to build everything. And in order to keep that going, we have created structural racism, which has created opportunity gaps in education and advancement. It keeps the haves having and the have-nots not. And it's perpetuated by the powers, by the benefits to the people who have, and by the suffering of the people who don't. And this also leads to healthcare disparities, especially cardiovascular disease and infant mortality. And it also leads to white privilege, so unearned benefits of people who happen to have white or lighter skin, and their support of the status quo. And it's the people who have white privilege holding on to that then furthers the propagation of structural racism because it benefits them. And this goes on, and it's a vicious cycle. So there have been a lot of things this year that have pushed what we like to call well-meaning white folks into additional learning, additional action. And these are two books that I've read that I found to be very helpful and that I highly recommend. I mean, White Fragility is important to read if you're white. How to Be an Anti-Racist, I think, is important for everybody. And these were two books that a new group used to launch a program, and that group is called Unite. I can tell you later if you want to know why this is the same name as the NIH's recent program for anti-racism, but we founded it first. It was called Underrepresented, it stands for Underrepresented Needs in Technology and Engineering. It was founded by 4 women, faculty in biomedical engineering. It was really founded by Kelly Stevens and Lola Iniola at Efeso. And then they invited Princess Imokwede and I to join them. And Kelly is faculty at University of Washington. Lola is at University of Michigan. Princess is at WashU St. Louis, and then myself at UC Irvine. And the mission of the group is to combat racism, address disparities in funding, journal reviews, hiring, and other areas that are race-based, amplify Black and Brown voices, and achieve equity in biomedical engineering. So this is broader than biomechanics, but I think there's a pretty big subset that is overlapping here. We meet by Zoom every 6 weeks. And as I said, the very first Zoom meeting we had was a book discussion, a book club of white fragility. 6 weeks later, we had a book discussion of how to be an anti-racist. You don't have to be a faculty member to join. You don't even have to be a woman faculty member to join. But it's important to note that this is a group of women faculty. So women faculty in BME combating racism. We are not there to talk about like white women. Okay, we're really there to talk about achieving racial equity and lifting Black and Brown voices. It's just organized by women. So that group has been going on Slack. It's been holding discussion groups. It's here's Kelly and Lola. And this was the central figure, I would say, from the paper that we put out. And maybe you put that in the chat. I saw some things in the chat. Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, basically the central message of the paper is that we've known about race-based disparities in NIH funding for over a decade, and people keep sort of throwing up their hands and saying, oh no, this is terrible, but not actually taking action to change it. Or they'll say, oh, let's study it some more, and not taking action to change it. And this paper was saying, enough of the talk, let's put some money toward the problem, and let's and this was really a call to action to the NIH and some other institutions to say this must be fixed. And in fact, it wouldn't take that much money to fix, because if you were to do sort of a back of the envelope calculation of how much it would cost to correct the twofold difference in funding rates for Black PIs versus white PIs, it would be 32 million. Which is a pretty small percent of NIH's annual budget. And the reason it's that low is because even though there's this twofold difference, still only about 2% of PIs who submit R01s are Black. So it's just not that many grants. It's not that much money. And we would fundamentally change the career trajectory of the people that we're trying so hard to get into the field and keep in the field, because why? And then that's this figure. So the why here is that if we have, a very homogeneous group of funded scientists in this country or any country, then we're going to get very uninteresting solutions to the problems that face us, maybe not even very good solutions. And we'll get very homogeneous problem solving, lack of innovation, and furthermore, we're spending time trying to address the pipeline and bringing diverse faculty in from grad school and elsewhere, and then we're not allowing them to reach that second level. So it's an enormous waste of time and energy and resources, in addition to intellectual capacity and discovery. So by addressing this tiny little red dot, right, and putting 32 million US tax dollars into the solution, we could get much better problem solving. We could get much better innovation, much better creativity. So that's what this, the message that this paper was trying to convey. And it's really something that we can all do. So it's very hard right now to cite Black scientists. As Madison will tell you, the search for race of authors is not something that really is automated right now, because the journals that publish our papers collect our, our ORCID ID, but right now ORCID ID does not have race and gender information that they're willing to share. So we have to do this consciously. We have to collaborate with Black scientists. We have to promote the work of Black scientists. In fact, we have to get to know Black scientists, and also, of course, fund fun Black scientists. So as individuals, so this is not something you can do, but when you become faculty, you can do this. You can, when you review grants, you can make sure to score them well, make sure to incorporate the idea that there is innovation in building a diverse team. I can talk about this more later. You can rescue the grants of Black faculty to ensure that they're discussed. And if you're not familiar with the rescue system, at least in NIH, I'm happy to talk about that. You can consider diversity when scoring the investigating team and innovation. And of course, you should be educating yourself. So, and probably I don't need to say this, but the way to educate yourself is not to go up to a Black friend and say, so what can you teach me about racism? You don't walk up to random people on the street and say, can you teach me how to do my hair? You really need to, investigate things. Oh, and maybe more importantly, when you do your science, you read the journal articles, you do the background research, you start with the older papers, you read the textbooks, you teach yourself, as students and trainees, you're here to learn. And the same can be applied to systemic racism, anti-racism. So, and there's so many resources out there now, right? Like videos and books and podcasts. And so anyway, number one, educate yourself. And then don't be a bystander, a passive bystander. Make sure and call out and stop things when you see them in review panels. This is relevant too, but in your institutions, in your environments, in your Facebook feed, if you're still on Facebook, and then reach out to other colleagues who are different than you. You've already talked about othering here in this discussion, and others bring perspectives that we don't have, and that is a good thing when you're doing science. Different perspectives lead to more interesting solutions. So reach out, find people, get different perspectives, and incorporate them into your teams. Our institutions can make sure that they're working positively towards change and kind of walking the walk. Sometimes their stated values are really at odds with their actions, and we need to call them to account when that happens. Our institutions can also need to be aware of how their practices of hiring and promotion and tenure may be biased by racial funding disparities, may be biased by citation disparities. So if they think that if the institution believes that there are these metrics like H-index that help you understand the objective quality of a researcher, then we need to be clear that that's not the case and share that with the folks who are making those decisions. Institutions can also help with money. That's dependent on the institution. And then I thought I'd stop here and acknowledge my group. This is a slightly older picture of my group, but not too old. This is, well, we were still in Wisconsin. You can see Ruska's here sporting the badger. But I thought that this slide would be a good transition to Madison here in this picture, who could now take some time to talk about the Citation Diversity Statement more specifically, which really does not address the fact that women and people of color get cited less. It is a way to raise awareness of who you're citing with the goal of with the idea of being a first step towards greater accountability in citation and greater citation of the work of women and underrepresented minorities. So Madison, I think that if you wanted to, I don't really know, you could request, how's that work? You can request to advance the slides. Otherwise I can advance them for you.
I think that's okay. I don't have too many slides, if that's all right with you.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, so Thanks for having me also, everyone. It's nice to be here. So I'm just going to talk, as Dr. Chesler said, a little bit more about the specifics of creating a citation diversity statement so that hopefully you can use these tools and start to implement them in your own publications. And I just really want to emphasize that it's easy to use this method. So you should definitely do it. However, as we've started to talk about, there are definitely limitations with these databases and a lot of work that we all need to put into to improve the efficacy of these and the awareness. So basically, studies have shown citation imbalances across gender, race, and ethnicity. And citation diversity statements are really an important tool for progress against these citation imbalances. And they serve two real primary purposes. The first is to help the authors attempt to improve their own citation balance and also draw the reader's attention to the problem so that they can reevaluate their own work. And important components of these statements are the importance and motivation behind citation diversity. So that's number one. Also, the proportion of citations by gender and race or ethnicity, so including those for your specific references for the first and last authors. So that's typically what's been done, is just showing the first and last author. And then describing the method used to determine these proportions and their limitations, and then listing the steps that the authors are taking to improve citation diversity in the article. So now we can, I think, go to the next slide. So to go into creation of a citation diversity statement here. So I recently wrote one, as Dr. Chesler said, for a manuscript for which I'm the first author, using the tools that were referenced in Dr. Chesler's publication. So the steps are really pretty simple, but the first one is to just compile a bib file with your references. So using any reference manager, really, EndNote, Zotero, whatever you're using. And then the second one is to go to the Jupyter notebook that has all these files that's listed in the paper. And basically you follow the instructions to clean the reference file and the output information. And what it does is it removes references to the same first or same last author. So reducing that redundancy, and then also forces you to add information about first and last names so that they can so that it can look into these databases. And so for gender information specifically, this searches Gender API, which gives probabilistic gender classifiers based on birth assignment and social media information. And then for race, they're pulling from the Ethnicolor package information based on US Census data. So outputs from here, from running the code, will be shown on the next slide, but also here, I just showed an example of looking up my own name from Gender API. So it gives you, it says they're 92% confident that this person is female. So generally when they're splitting it up by who are the authors, there's defining a woman for that name if it's 70% or greater confidence that that author is a woman based on the databases. So now we can go to the next slide. Yep, thank you. So here is an example from my personal bib file. So you can see based on gender, I had for first author / last author, I had 10.2% woman, woman, 12.8% woman, man, 64.1% man, man, and 10.3% man, woman. And you can also see here compared to the top 5 neuroscience journals, referenced in a study by Dworkin, this is a higher rate of both man, man and woman, woman citations compared to thousands of studies that they looked at in the neuroscience field. And then running the Jupyter notebook also gives you a breakdown of the first and last author in the form of the visual below by both race and gender. So, and then going to the next slide, please. So I know that this is a lot of text, but this is what an example or what it gives you for the output for the citation diversity statement. So of course you can make modifications for what you think is important and relevant to your field or your study, but it includes necessary limitations. So one thing that's important to note is that this may not be indicative of gender identity, cannot account for intersex, non-binary, transgender, or inter-race individuals. So definitely important to list those limitations here. I think just wanted to show this. We can move to the next slide, but really this is just a good way to bring an awareness to these breakdowns. So going forward, some goals to keep in mind for all of us are to include diversity statements in your work and be proactive about citing diverse scientists. And really, we need to go beyond that. We need to go beyond the gender binary and beyond just citation diversity. So as Dr. Chesler was talking about, collaborating with all scientists. So here are a few resources for both building collaborations as well as finding people to cite within different fields. So yeah, I hope this information was helpful. And I guess Dr. Chesler, do you want to take over and take questions, or? I think you're still muted.
Always do that. Yeah, so thank you very much. So actually, before we go to the questions in the chat, Madison, how long did this take you to do from the start of searching to creation of the written paragraph?
I don't know, less than 30 minutes for sure. I don't remember exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it did not take very long.
So I've heard from other people that it takes longer, so I'm not quite sure why that would be. We'll have to look into that at some point. Okay, so look at questions. So does this only work in the US, and does it only have 2 sexes? So I think you addressed the second one. It only has 2 sexes, right? Any reason it would only work in the US?
I don't believe so, just because the databases are pulling from social media profiles as well.
I think it's only the US. I mean, unless different countries have very different gender assignments of names. The thing is, it's all guesswork, right? So if Dana is a man in England and a woman in the US, it's going to be wrong, right? Or what's the other one? Francis is like, you know, different in different countries, I think. And then androgynous names, right? I think it's not going to do a good job. I mean, this is why I personally think that the way to do that, it's you know, people are afraid. You know, there are women out there who don't want to have to identify their sex in ORCID ID, and because it would be used to not cite them. So I think the question is, what is the balance between conscious bias, like, oh, this is a woman, I'm not going to review her paper well, or unconscious bias, my unconscious is telling me this is a woman's paper, I'm not going to review it well. And so if it's mostly conscious, you don't want to let people know. And if it's mostly unconscious, you might as well let people know so that at least their biases can be evident to them. And this happens in all kinds of sort of bias, right? I mean, we all probably know scientists who use their first initial instead of their name because they don't want to reveal their sex to reviewers, which is under the argument that it's unconscious, or that maybe it's both, right? But interestingly, you know, in the world, if you meet the author, you know their sex, you know their race, and it's there unconsciously. So I guess I'm of the mind that, like, let's make it conscious, let's make it public, let's make it accountable, and then let's deal with it, not just sort of leave it up to the status quo to allow us to publish. But you know, there's certain kinds of let's say identities that there really is physical. I mean, there's plenty of identities where there's physical harm, and we don't want to be outing people in ways that they're not comfortable with, that make them feel vulnerable, or that really do make them vulnerable. So I understand the reasons on either side, but I feel like there's while I understand the concerns, I feel like there's value in collecting the data so that we can publish it and make it and start to address it. So I see that Freya, is that your name? You have a question. I don't know whether we should also address the other comments in the chat. How do you want to do things on here?
Either way, sorry, Freya, did you have a question or?
No, I think I just
I think that's
moved my hand. Sorry.
Okay.
I was like suddenly panicking.
Sorry. Okay. So is there ability to correct something if you personally know the authors, meaning like if you think that they've miscategorized the sex and such?
Yeah, correct. So like I have, I know a lot of people and I somewhat have an androgynous name, not necessarily the Alexa, but I go by Alex frequently. And am commonly like people respond to my emails, like citing me as a he. But like if you know somebody that has an androgynous name, or you know maybe somebody who has a name that's not common, that you know whether or not like which I guess biological sex it belongs to, can you categorize that for the program?
I'm putting that to you, Madison.
So not the way that it's written, no. And even though I had some references that I knew that they were incorrect, I left them just for the sake of going based on what the database said. Also, it does flag you. I see another question. It alerts you to which citations need more information. So also when I say 30 minutes, I think I had already filled in and tried to make sure I could put in as many first and last author, first and last names as possible before I ran it through in the bib file. So that's one thing that definitely takes a little bit of time as well. But it'll flag you for those, so you can try to look up the individual ones if they're not already imported.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is why I really want ORCID ID to allow folks to self-identify, because that's the only way we're going to get race correct, sex appropriate, gender, however it is that we want to identify. That it has to be self-identification. Go ahead, Katie.
Oops, sorry. I just had a follow-up kind of on the, like, I guess, post-processing or checking. So when you have made these statements, you said you kind of went with what the database said, but have you used it for other publications you've written? And do you go through and like kind of check and adjust? How do you, if you use this kind of regularly, how does that process vary from publication to publication?
Yeah, so I guess I would just say for me, this one happened to be retroactive, just because I did it with kind of a completed manuscript and bibliography, but now seeing the results, it definitely has motivated me to set it up so that I can do it as I'm writing. So I think I would say doing it the first time has definitely changed my process. And I think it's interesting to do it early on just to kind of see where you're at, and then that can help you be more proactive.
I think what we should also be thinking about doing this for our curricula. So if you look at, many biomechanics courses are textbook based, but many are publication based. And so if your professor has a series of publications that they're having you read and claiming that they're seminal, but they're all from white authors or all male authors, then that's something that is worth bringing up. Oh, that's a good question. Anyway, so I mean, I'm not sure. I would love to see this same approach used to curricula. And the same is true in terms of, when you talk about curricular design, there's another piece to it, which is like the family tree of researchers. Do you know what I mean? Like, everybody's maybe heard of Langer Labs. I mean, he's more chemical engineering than biomechanics, but when you've got this sort of founder that has trainees and trainees and trainees, but they're all from the same line. It's really problematic when course design is structured around a very narrow viewpoint. And so I think it'd be interesting if there was some way to make sure that there was a good diversity of readings in curricula. So right now, BMES journals are not requiring this citation diversity statement, and we're discussing whether it should be submitted before or after review. So I want to answer that question. Does it count against the word count? Not at all. And we're trying to figure out how we would incorporate it. In other words, like right now, it does not feel right to have it influence the reviewers one way or another because it's optional. On the other hand, I I don't know. Anyway, so that's, we're trying to figure out, we've sort of published this editorial to say like, here it is, feel free to do it. We're not requiring it. And we were sort of thinking of having like a reading period where we get feedback from folks and to gather their experiences and then decide as a team of like editors and, publications committee members what to do next. So I'm not quite sure what's next, but it's for sure not required and it doesn't count against any word counts.
Thank you so much. I had a question kind of more related to your advice.
Sure.
So we have a group that's majority early career, like a lot of PhD students, a lot of individuals that are not in academia as well, but probably we skew a little bit more towards like a younger career crowd in this group. And I'm wondering if you have advice for us women that are, you were saying like to speak up if you see microaggressions or anything like that. If you have any advice, like, because there's sort of a balance of like being in an early career position and facing these, the chairs of your departments or the deans or so on. How have you gotten allies? How have you kind of dealt with that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's, being a trainee can be a somewhat vulnerable position, although there's also people who are more vulnerable than you. So I think that's important to remember that even though it feels like you don't have much power, you do. But I mean, I think I always recommend finding allies and finding out who has the power in the system and trying to make that person be your ally, or at least checking in to make sure you're not, publicly opposing the person with the absolute most power. So, I mean, hopefully your peers are your allies, your advisors, I would hope would be your allies. And even if it's not your advisor, there ought to be someone in the department who can act as an ally. And so you can approach those known allies, but I also want to say, like, it's okay to fight the good fight. I mean, it's in a productive, constructive, respectful way, right? I mean, if you have and you do it the same way you do your science. So let's say you get a reading list for a course that's like so homogeneous, like you're upset. So if you were to take sort of the research that says that, groupthink is bad, or you take our Fun Black Scientists, or you take our Citation Diversity Statement to your professor and say, hey, I was reading these papers and it made me think that maybe we could have a more diverse slate of authors in this curriculum. What do you think? Like, I mean, I'm not saying to like, wave a flag and report them to the dean. I'm saying like, have a conversation, because you are an important person in the system. You are a trainee, you are the next generation. And, you are working to become a scientist yourself. And this is an important piece of science. So I guess I would say use your voice. I think the bystander thing is harder. Like, that's the stuff that comes off the cuff. So I'll tell you a little anecdote. So here at UCI, we have people called equity liaisons, maybe, I forget what they're called. And so they are faculty who are specifically trained and given the responsibility of paying special attention to equity. So, for example, there has to be an equity liaison on each search committee. They review a lot of processes. Anyway, so we were interviewing a faculty candidate, and it's all by Zoom. And so in the Zoom, there was a small group discussion with this faculty candidate, and one of the people in the Zoom said, "So, are you Hispanic? What do you call yourself?" And like, so I was not there in the room, but another faculty member who was in the room chatted me later saying, "You would not believe what happened, like this happened." And I was like, "Well, I have to report this. Who else was in the room?" And she told me, and I'm like, "Isn't that one of the equity coordinators?" And she's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to report it to her. So I called her and I said, I heard that this happened. I'm very upset. We need to something needs to happen. And she's like, it was like, I didn't know what to do. Like it was happening and I couldn't figure out what to say in the moment. So what I'm saying is that is a faculty member who's post tenure, whose job, who has been given the role to be an equity advisor or whatever it is her title is, equity coordinator. And she even could not address that in the moment, a completely wrong and offensive statement by a faculty to a faculty candidate. So, so give yourself some grace, as we say, right? So work to stop things in the moment, but if you can't, because it is hard, then give yourself the grace to say, well, maybe there's something else I can do. That's the piece where I think we make ourselves vulnerable. We can say the wrong thing. We could, so anyway, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. It's so much easier said than done, right? To speak up in the moment. And it takes practice, I think, you be comfortable using that language. I think we have another question in the chat. So
hi, Krista, nice to see you. Oh yeah. I'll answer this unless Madison, you want to, but we did not get accepted into that journal that we first submitted it to. Actually, even in that journal, they didn't request a citation diversity statement, did they? Yeah, so I don't know. We're just doing it.
And that's great. I'm all for that. I'm intend to do that on the next manuscripts I submit to. Do you think that there's journals that will count this against you in your word count? Do you think, I'm not opposed to this, but do you think reviewers will count that against you? Is it something that should be, it's so new. How do you know? But yeah. I would like to be as prepared as I can be to start getting this out there too.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. And like I said, even the BMES journals, we don't know whether they should be they should be included as part of a review or not. Animal care approval is definitely part of review. Human subjects, definitely part of review. This is brand new. If it's not if it's either way, if it's a requirement, I guess it'll be rejected if there's nothing there. But Madison didn't talk about this, but in the article, we had 3 different ways that you could write a citation diversity statement. One was to say, it's a good idea to do a citation diversity statement, but we didn't do one. And that's one option. And another one is to do some sort of middle ground. And then there was a third option. I don't know, we would have to look at it, but is that part of the review if someone doesn't want to do it and we feel like it's important? I do not know. I think that being worried that you might be reviewed poorly on the basis of it is a bit of that unearned privilege that helps you maintain the status quo.
Totally. Yep.
So I feel like let's give it up.
Yep.
And I'm allowed to say that because I'm a full professor, but one would hope that I would have done it as an assistant professor. I don't know, or I'm not going to hold it against anybody if they don't want to do it. But I feel the tension, but we also want the world to change, and you want to be the kind of scientist and engineer that you want to be, right? So there has to be some give and take somewhere.
It's got to start somewhere. Yeah, for sure.
Kat,
thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kat.
Hey, thanks both of you. That was really interesting. It seems that if we're going to be including these citation diversity statements more and using the data in them to do with who we're actually citing and what the percentages are and so on, we needed quite a good understanding or a better understanding, or it sounds like we've got, of how accurate those data are and when they're reliable and when they're not. So kind of what can we do about that? I agree with you that the ORCID ID self-reporting seems like a no-brainer way of making it easy, but is Is somebody kind of working on that at the moment, or are there approaches people are taking to try and improve the quality of our data here?
So I'm not aware of people working on better search engines, analysis techniques, correlative analyses, although there probably are, because I'm sure there's a lot of money in understanding people's race from and gender from names and other kind of information that you can gather in nefarious ways. So in addition to the ORCID ID, I've been talking to the journals. Like Springer is the publisher for all BMES journals. Actually, ASME is the publisher for all ASME journals. And like I said, we haven't been working with them very much, although there is some movement. Actually, the new chair, I'm really bad with titles, you can tell from all the times I'm stumbling on this, but like Beth Winkelstein is a biomechanics researcher at UPenn. And she's now the editor-in-chief of all ASME journals, okay, or something like this. And so she is pushing diversity. She's a big advocate for diversity. And so we've got now a diversity, we're advertising right now for a diversity advocate for the ASME journals, who is going to be tasked with trying to, I'm not sure what, include more authors or include better citation diversity. I'm not sure. But anyway, so Springer is the publisher for the BMES journals, all 4 of them. And we've been talking with them, and they keep passing the buck and saying, oh, well, it really ought to be ORCID ID. But we were saying, well, why can't you collect some of this information? And it's just kind of back and forth. I mean, publishing is a business. And so, yes, it's an academic pursuit and we want to advance science, but they want to make money, and there's no money in this unless we stop going to Springer because they won't do what we want, right? So anyway, so I've been talking with Springer. There was another push recently, which some of you may know about, which was name changes. So there's the name change that we're all familiar with, of getting married or getting divorced, and then there's the name change due to like gender reassignment, or I apologize, I don't know what the right terminology is, but having a different gender, and then you've got publications with your dead name, and you don't want, like, you want your publications to be counted, but you don't want your dead name out there in press. You don't want it referred to. So there was a recent speaker, it was part of the BMES diversity something last year. They had a speaker who had petitioned the journals to change their name, and that was successful. I think it was the Nature series, I'm not quite sure. And so that is actually moving along. So that initiative to allow sort of retroactive name changes is moving forward. And that was with the journals rather than with ORCID ID. So that's a path to follow.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
As you're talking, you remind me also of how we can sometimes, suggest peer reviewers for these journals, and to also be conscious of who we're asking to peer review, and using this maybe as a check to see what.
Yeah, that's a little tricky because reviewing is a burden.
Yeah.
And so, you want to be careful. Like, so it's very challenging, because let's say you wanted racial diversity in your reviewers. There's not enough Black and brown reviewers out there to equal the number of white reviewers. And so now we're, increasing the burden on Black and brown reviewers 8-fold. That's not right? And so this is the constant problem in academia of having diverse committees, is that then your Black and brown colleagues have way more diverse committee work than your white colleagues, which is just, and there's no career advancement for that, right? So you're doing service work and you're not getting your research done. So that it's a tricky thing.
That's a good point. All right, we're coming up on the hour. Are there any other questions or comments? This is a safe space to share.
So can I just see, I don't know if I can see a show of hands, but can you all vote with your raise hand button. How many people go to SB3C? You know how to do a raise hand? It's either no one or I'm not making sense what I'm asking you to do. Thank you, Madison.
Yeah, hopefully they can. If not, there's reactions too.
All right, let's see a reaction if you go to SB3C. Okay, 1, 2, huh,
We got a couple.
a couple. Okay, interesting. Well, I don't know what that means. Maybe you all should recruit more from the SB3C crowd.
Yeah.
I'm glad that ASB is such a good meeting. But anyway, at SB3C, we do have women's events, we have mentoring events, we have a diversity committee. It's very active. So if your PI, oh yeah, thank you. Can somebody put that in the chat? Let's see. You don't want me to go find it, do you? Madison, you can do it. You know what it is. Yeah. I was like, so it's if your PI goes to the Summer Bioengineering, Biomechanics, Biotransport Conference, then please go. It's a great conference. I really like it. It's a great community. Of course, if that's not your area of research, you shouldn't go. But oh, and there's non-academics. Oh, that's nice. I didn't mean to other you. I'm happy that you're here. Yeah.
Yeah, I know a couple from my lab definitely attend. I haven't yet been, but we should definitely bring this up. We're definitely trying to spread awareness of this group, and we would
We also have travel awards for women and people of color to attend.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We're going to do breakout rooms, but for now I will end the meeting or end the recording. So thank you so much to our speakers.